Lesson 3. World War II and Changes Ahead. I will know how World War II affected Texas and the United States. Vocabulary: neutral, communism, suburb, civil rights. After World War II, new neighborhoods outside of cities were created for soldiers and their families. Design, label, and explain a new kind of neighborhood for people to live in today. People had hoped that World War I would be the war to end all wars. But the years following the war, though peaceful, were troubled. Then in 1939, Germany attacked Poland. Once again, countries in Europe took sides. Britain, France, and the Soviet Union joined together as the Allies. They fought the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. World War II had begun. World War II. At first, the United States tried to remain neutral. Neutral means not supporting one side or the other. Then the Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. On the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese planes bombed American ships anchored in the harbor. Doris Miller, a Texas sailor aboard the USS West Virginia, saw it all. He defended his ship by shooting at the Japanese planes and received the Navy Cross for his bravery under fire. The United States declared war on Japan and Germany. They joined the Allies. Americans, including many Texans, rushed to defend their country. In fact, Texas sent a larger proportion of its population to serve during the war than any other state, about 750,000 people, including 12,000 women. A number of divisions or army groups trained in Texas. The men of the 36th Division proudly wore a patch with a T on an arrowhead. They were called the Texas Division. They were among the first Americans to go overseas. Texans fought bravely in Africa, Asia, and Europe. 33 Texans won the Medal of Honor. This is the highest military honor. It is given for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. In fact, the most decorated American in the war was Lieutenant Audie Murphy of Farmersville, Texas. Murphy joined the Army as a private. He was 18. He personally stopped an attack by enemy tanks and received 33 awards, citations, and decorations. Later, he became a successful actor and songwriter. General Dwight D. Eisenhower commanded United States forces in Europe. He led the troops in important battles and invasions and accepted the surrender of the Germans in 1945. Born in Denison, Texas, Eisenhower later became the 34th President of the United States. More Texans in the war. About 500,000 Latinos fought bravely in World War II. Many of them were from Texas. Clito Rodriguez of San Antonio was one of 5 Mexican Americans to win the Medal of Honor. He saw action in the South Pacific where he helped to defeat the Japanese. In 1975, an elementary school was named in his honor. Texan women played a vital role in the war. About 1,000 women served as pilots during the war. Most of them were trained in Texas. Ovida Culp Hobby of Houston helped to plan and run the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, WAAC, for the United States. The WAAC provided female volunteers a way to serve during the war. Under Hobby's direction, hundreds of thousands of women did a wide range of useful Army jobs, from parachute folding to secretarial work. Industry and war. Texas industries boomed during the war. Front and center was the oil industry. Battleships, planes, tanks, and jeeps all ran on gasoline. Texas oil and gas companies supplied about half of all the fuel needed for the war. Rubber, made from petroleum and other materials, also came from Texas factories. The United States government purchased these products from Texas. Old businesses retooled to supply war materials. Materials were needed to make uniforms and tents. For example, Texas businessman Stanley Marcus found ways to help conserve textiles. Marcus had developed his family's company, Neiman Marcus, into a luxury clothing store. In 1941, he joined the War Production Board. He helped convince Americans to make do with the clothing they had. It also helped the war effort. Texas farmers grew huge amounts of crops to feed the Allies. To meet the demand for steel, mills in Houston and Dangerfield produced thousands of tons. Factories in Houston, Galveston, and Corpus Christi built ships. Airplanes were built near Dallas and Fort Worth. As the demand for war materials increased, so did the demand for workers. Women took the jobs of men who had gone to war. 500,000 rural Texans moved to Texas cities to work in wartime factories. So did people from around the country and from Mexico. Cities grew rapidly. The number of wage earners in Texas more than doubled from 1939 to 1945. In 1945, the Axis powers surrendered. The Allies had won. Millions of people, including about 22,000 Texans, had died in the fighting and from other causes. Those who came home found a different place. The Great Depression was over. Texas industry was on the move. Texas culture and art. As times changed rapidly in the 1900s, some Texans saw a need to preserve the past. Objects and inventions that had once seemed modern were being quickly replaced with newer things. So Texans built museums to preserve our rich history. The oldest state museum is the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. It holds a real windmill, a chuck wagon, arrowheads, and more. Many other museums were built when Texas celebrated its 100 years of independence in 1936. One of these, the San Jacinto Monument and Museum, honors the heroes of the Battle of San Jacinto. The museum tells the history of Texas and the region over thousands of years. Texas musicians of the early 20th century also left their mark on Texas history. Julius Lorenzo Cobb Bledsoe of Waco sang opera and musicals, composed music, and acted in film. An African American, he was famous in Europe as well as the United States. Tejana singer Chelo Silva of Brownsville became an international star with her hits on the radio. Lydia Mendoza of Houston was called the Lark of the Border. She recorded an estimated 50 albums during her long career as a conjunto singer. The conjunto style combines traditional Mexican music and German polkas. For her contribution to Mexican-American music, Lydia Mendoza received many awards, including the National Medal of Arts in 1999. 4. Summarize. Restate the contributions of Julius Lorenzo Cobb Bledsoe and Chelo Silva in the development of Texas. A changing country. Following World War II, New Union entered a conflict called the Cold War. It was fought in smaller conflicts like the Korean and Vietnam Wars. The two countries also fought with ideas, words, and money. As a democracy, the United States opposed communism, the political system of the Soviets. Communism is a system in which the government owns all the property in a country. Under the free enterprise system in the United States, private individuals own most of the property. In spite of the Cold War, the United States experienced economic prosperity. Many Texans had more money than ever before. They bought things such as cars and homes. Cars and new highways had an impact on life in Texas. In the 1950s, the United States government began building the interstate highway system. It connected the large cities of the country. The new roads linked Americans in new ways. They added to the interdependence of states and regions. The new roads made trade and travel between states easier. New roads in Texas also meant that people could live farther from their jobs than they had before. Many people began moving to the suburbs. A suburb is a community next to or near a city. In the 1950s, the building of expressways for automobiles helped suburbs to develop and grow all around cities such as Houston. This was a new pattern of settlement. People could buy less expensive houses in the suburbs. Families clustered there. What did families in the suburbs do for fun? They watched the newest invention, television. Grocery stores soon began selling another new idea, special frozen meals called TV dinners. The Civil Rights Movement. While many Americans prospered in the 1950s and 1960s, others continued to face serious problems. Many African Americans and Mexican Americans did not have the same rights as Anglo-Americans. Denied equal opportunity, they earned less money for the same jobs. They were treated unfairly at schools and work. African Americans could not go into some restaurants and movie theaters or ride in the front seats of buses. Some Mexican American children had to go to separate schools in Texas. This unfair separation, based on race, is called segregation. African Americans and Mexican Americans struggled to end segregation and discrimination in all their forms. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a national movement to give all individuals equal rights. People marched to show their support. In Texas, the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, LULAC, fought in the courts for the desegregation of Mexican schools and other civil rights for Mexican Americans. Civil rights are the rights of people to enjoy freedom and equality. The work of thousands of activists helped people throughout Texas gain their civil rights. Today, segregation is illegal. In 1964, the United States Congress created a law sponsored by President Lyndon B. Johnson. The Civil Rights Act made fair treatment the law of the land. People could no longer be treated differently based on their race, religion, or gender. In 1967, Texans elected Barbara Jordan to the Texas Senate. She was the first black state senator since 1883. She helped African Americans register to vote in the 1960s. The civil rights activist and lawyer from Houston went on to become president of the Texas Senate. Later, she became the first African American woman from a southern state to serve in the United States Congress. In 1994, she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Many changes have taken place since the 1960s, but more work remains to secure fair treatment and equal rights and opportunity for everyone.